thank you. Thank you all for sticking around. We have a really terrific panel here. Just as another introduction, I'm Dan Roth. I'm the executive editor of LinkedIn. One of the things I oversee is the influencer program, which is a way to get the top minds in business and the professional world sharing their insights with 200 million plus LinkedIn members. We have 3 of our influencers on stage. They've all done really incredible work writing long-form content that reaches the professional world, some funny, some serious, a lot of great anecdotes about what's going on in their lives. And what we're going to talk about a little bit is the idea of personal branding, of the idea of becoming an influencer in your own industry. Why do it? What things to look out for? What's useful? What's not useful? How to interact with commenters. So why don't we start with Clara? You want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you've been doing with influencer?
Sure. Clara, Shih, CEO and founder of Hearsay Social, enterprise software company based in Silicon Valley and close partner with LinkedIn. I've been an influencer for 6 months now, and it's just amazing that what LinkedIn has done in terms of marrying subject matter expertise with an incredible distribution network. And it's been really gratifying for me, in this rapidly evolving space of social media for business, being able to share my thoughts and get immediate feedback from both existing customers as well as people halfway around the world that I've never met.
Herb?
I'm Herb Greenberg. I'm with CNBC. When I heard there was an influencers program, and I was not on it, legend in my own mind, I went to our social media person and I said, how can I be part of that? And I felt that I've been involved with LinkedIn in a different way because I paid for LinkedIn for the past 4 years or so because I use it for sourcing. It's a great idea, for research. And so I said, I want to do this thing. I want to try it. And quickly got on there, and I was stunned by the reaction. And as I tweeted out, and I told anyone who will listen, the surprising part of being part of the program was the quality of the comments. And as someone who's written online since the mid-90s, when I had a site on America Online, going way back, then with TheStreet.com and MarketWatch, Dow Jones, all sorts of places, I've seen comments. And the typical online comments are just, they're what they are. They're garbage often, and they are like message boards. The exception tends to be blogs, personal blogs that some people have that are very thoughtful. This was remarkable. I would post something and look at you could post another story with the comments to highlight the comments because the comments are that good. So I did this because I was looking for I'm always looking for ways to help my personal brand as a journalist and as a commentator. And then when I realized the quality of the demographics of this thing and who is reading it, I thought it couldn't hurt. And it's it's hard to measure the impact, but what I can tell you is that when you watch the number of followers, currently, I have more followers on here now than I have on Twitter, or equal to what I have on Twitter.
I've noticed that.
Which is intriguing that it's come up. Twitter's been 3 years in the making with me, and this has been 6 months. And I think these are quality followers who are watching your stuff. And if you post something in the main tag, just post something, you get comments on that. So you see that people are following you. Anyway, I got into this. It's been successful. I'll let Sallie go in with her. Sallie did this for only one reason. She will explain it. I know why.
I'm trying to remember what that reason was.
I think it's the cat.
The cat picture?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm Sallie Krawcheck. Boy, this is loud. Sorry if I'm blasting you. Formerly of Smith Barney, Citigroup, Merrill Lynch, U.S. Trust, former research analyst, and I guess current, now it went way down, current gal about town. And I was in the original group, which was it was very interesting to me because at the time I had some thoughts that I wanted to share because I thought they could have an impact on certain important discussions we were having in the country, be they about bank regulation, which I have some insight into, some experience with, some knowledge of, be they about individual investor issues, be they about management lessons learned along the way, be they about the issues of women in business, and had really been sort of playing with might not be quite strong enough a word, but really thinking through what the best channels were to engage in some of these national debates that we were having. Had written a few op-eds, had actually been asked to write for a few media outlets. This was the one where, to me, it seemed like the value proposition, the get-give, was so even, whereby that we could provide the content for LinkedIn and they could provide professional followers and promote the stuff. I have more followers on LinkedIn than Twitter. I have more than 10 times more followers on LinkedIn than Twitter. And I would echo, they did not pay us to do a commercial here, by the way, but I would, sort of echo the comments that what's so interesting about it is that as opposed to an op-ed, whereas we were discussing before, you write it, it's accepted or it's not, it's edited or it's not, it's published soon or it's published later, and then the feedback tends to be a few comments on the media website or a couple of letters to the editor. Here, when you're ready to go, you go. And the comments are absolutely immediate, and not everyone is of the absolute highest quality. Occasionally people forget they're not anonymous, and I remind them, but they tend to be, some very interesting comments come back.
Well, while I could happily do a commercial up here for the rest of our time, I would love to just talk a little bit about the idea of, I think that one of the things that all three of you do so well is you write with a very personal tone of voice. It is very clear that you're not writing press releases, that you don't have ghostwriters who are doing this for you, that they're, especially in her case, who's paid to be a writer, but it's all very, it's incredibly authentic, and I think that the readers respond to that. When you're in a setting like this, where you're in heavily regulated industries, where everything is picked over with a fine comb, and you're worried about being sued, what kind of advice would you give to people who want to be experts themselves, or want to be influencers through their own blogs or through their own company sites, to have that kind of voice?
Well, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
From an operational perspective, compliance is table stakes, and you absolutely need to be doing the records retention and the pre-approval on static content. But I'd say that financial services, perhaps more than any other industry, needs that personal and authentic voice. I mean, something happened in society over the last decade or so where you've seen public sentiment in America and in Europe, in the Western world, shift from this traditional faith in big institutions, big media, big corporations, big banks, and that trust has been lost for a variety of different reasons. And so that, coupled with the insane amount of content in the internet, which has become this Wild West, it's really created this hunger from the American public, from the European public, for trusted, curated thoughts from human beings. Not the party line, not the scrubbed version, not the form email that's spam, but actually an authentic voice. And it's equally true whether you're writing as Mohammed El-Arian from PIMCO, or you're the marketing person for a large number of advisors or bankers, each of whom has to now be a subject matter expert and really demonstrate their value as they guide their clients through this complicated financial process.
Well, as a writer, I come at this a little differently, because I have to worry about, I always think of libel. And I always think of getting sued. And I have a piece we recently did on CNBC.com and CNBC about a company that makes surgical robots. It was a 23-minute documentary, fairly critical, but balanced. And the amount of legal hoops that I had to jump through for this is more than I've ever jumped through for any story I've done in the nearly 40 years I've been doing this. So now I'm looking at doing a rebound piece for LinkedIn. And I want to do a first person, my reaction to something that I saw there. But in doing that, I have to be cognizant. And this is a careful thing right now, because journalists know the rules of engagement. Non-journalists often don't think about the rules of engagement. So now I'm writing it, and I have to come back and think through, reminding myself, the lawyers are going to be reading this too. Not my lawyers.
Right.
The lawyers for the company. And I have to be that much more careful, because I don't want to break my current record of having never been, knock on wood, sued, and I don't want this to be the place. And I think that actually is a challenge in this world that you're working in now, in this, as you go broader, because things aren't legal, and they're not going through legal, and you have to self-police yourself. And as it applies to a LinkedIn where you're dealing with compliance issues, my goodness, if that gets into another issue altogether.
Well, it's onerous, but it's not impossible.
No. And what I would add to this, and I've, as Clara does, I've got a little bit of experience with this. It's important that as leaders of these organizations, that you're very clear that the compliance people are the compliance people, and the writers are the writers. And as soon as they start trying to do each other's jobs, you start to have some problems, right? And sometimes we forget which jobs we have. And what I would say to those who are in charge of the writing, it's always worth coming back to, when you think about, in the old media, letters from the CEO in the annual report. Do you enjoy reading the Warren Buffett letter more, or the Jamie Dimon letter more, or a whole bunch of the others more? And that is heightened. That sense of talking to somebody, that sense of intimacy is really heightened when it's in social media. And right now, I'd say a lot of financial services social media is sort of on the realm still of look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, right? Look at me, look at me. And it feels like sort of stage one before you get to really engaging with the audience.
Well, I think that the people are so scared that they end up being incredibly, they try to be as bland as possible. The three of you are so not bland. So how do you first of all, how are you comfortable enough to be able to be out there? And so what Herb was talking about earlier was Sallie just wrote a post that really talked about how incredibly ugly her cat is in a really fantastic way. It's a post worth reading, and how her cat had climbed and kind of serviced herself, cleaned herself, let's say.
Serviced herself.
Sorry, cleaned herself with no servicing going on.
She's been fixed. Dan! Okay, so here's the story, all right? So the CEO of a company I used to work at, we were doing a cocktail party. I was doing a cocktail party for him of the biggest and most powerful clients of the business I ran. We put him on my staircase to do a little talk to the audience, as I've done a zillion times. And my daughter has a sort of deformed, if you look at the picture, you'll see what I'm talking about. The tooth sticks out, the whiskers don't grow right, the eyes halfway closed, the face is deformed, she's skinny, and she smells, right? And she's very shy, as you would be if you look like that. But about half, as the CEO started to talk, she came down the stairs, placed herself at head level with him, kicked up her leg, and started to clean herself for the entire time he spoke. And I'm not sure, although it was very interesting, because I don't think he ever knew, because he certainly didn't mention. It was interesting how some of your readers thought I'd gotten fired for that. And they're like, no, not for that.
Separate thing.
Totally separate issue, which I've also written about,
That's right.
As a matter of fact.
Which is another great point. So a long way of saying you are not afraid to put yourself out there.
Yeah,
Would you recommend that for other people in the room who want to be experts and want to develop
that story? That story I don't think made anybody more expert, though there was a moral to it, right? And the moral to it was that you gotta have fun as you go along, because there's no happy ending, right? I got sent home later, but you see these laugh until you can't breathe moments along the way, and just enjoy them along the way, because if you sort of wait till everything's perfect, you wait your whole life. But look, let's face it, it's a bit easier for me because I'm a gal about town right now. And so I don't have that compliance looking over and saying, do we really want to use the word nether regions, or is there something else we can use for the cat? But the point remains the same, which is an approachability and authenticity versus, I'm sure one or two other posts you've had on LinkedIn have looked like they come from the PR department. And people, immediately reject them.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd say that the sales reps in all of the banks and insurance companies we work with, they get this. The good sales reps know the way that you engage a client, just like when you're meeting face-to-face,
Absolutely.
isn't just to talk about products all day long, but to be funny and to be entertaining. And when there's some major change happening in the market, really taking a point of view and sharing it in a personal and authentic way. And so they're doing this, and I think a lot of our firms, we're catching up from a compliance perspective and now from a brand perspective, because sometimes they go a little too far. And sometimes the sales reps we have, oftentimes the sales reps we have in our organizations, they're not marketing people, they're not content people.
Right.
So there's this balance from an operational perspective. There are different roles to play. Just like Sallie said, compliance has a role, marketing has a role, IT has a role, and then these reps play a key role because they are perhaps your most effective and authentic channel for really getting the message out and engaging in that two-way dialogue.
But I'll even be controversial and just extend it, which is it's almost getting to the point now, and it will get to the point at some not very distant time in the future. Whereas if you're not engaging with this in an authentic way, you look old, right, and out of it. And it's not there now, but it will be. And particularly, I don't think I'm being controversial when there are those out there who would say the financial services industry has a bit of the out of touch issue, right? Yeah, you'd agree.
I would agree very much so.
Yeah.
Because it's the fear. It's the fear factor. You know, I think the authenticity, being authentic and telling whatever story it is, dealing with this doc. See, with social media, here's the question. When you talk about it, are you talking about Twitter? Are you talking about, you know, which means of social media are we talking about? I'm curious about this.
Well, it depends on whether it's social media at the corporate level, business unit level, or rep level, and which business. Is it institutional or is it retail? Are you serving mass affluent or are you serving ultra high net worth? It's really about going where your customer is.
But where's the customer? Are they looking at if they're looking at someone from that company, a company here has a social media site,
right.
Is the customer looking at that because there's someone who's really good they want to follow on Twitter from that company? Or is it Facebook? I'm trying to understand, as a journalist watching this, where that sort of is occurring.
So what's happening is today, it's harder and harder to drive people to your site. Yep. That old model of search it's outdated because there's too much out there. Today, people are lazy, they want to discover, and they're counting on their friends and colleagues and others that they follow and subscribe to on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. They're counting on those colleagues to tell them what to read, what to buy, and whom to buy from. And so what people do when they're standing in line, waiting for a cup of coffee at Starbucks, or they're waiting for the subway, is they've got their mobile device, which, by the way, has blurred the lines between personal and professional, and they're scanning through these feeds. And whatever product you're selling, you want to be top of mind by being in that.
But what you're talking about is context. I mean, I think that when you get down to it, it is the question of what is the context of where you're writing. If you're saying something on Twitter, if you're saying something on LinkedIn, if you're putting it on Snapchat, you know, are you tailoring your message differently than for each of these different markets, or is it write once, repurpose everywhere?
Well, and it's what kind of message through what channel, and then who are you trying to reach? So I recently met with a business that's tangentially related to financial services that is probably a step or two away, that's targeting young women, and they're getting most of their traffic from Pinterest. Right, and those young women tend to be very visual. Now, if you're Merrill Lynch, you're not getting a lot of 65-year-old millionaires through Pinterest, right?
What are you getting them through?
Well, today, for 65-year-olds, you're still getting them face-to-face. And that is something that I believe is going to change over time. What I think is going to happen, not to give away all the secrets, but what I think is going to happen is that for years and years and years, we told our financial advisors, and had the statistics to bear it out, that the fewer clients they had, the better their business was, which was a little counterintuitive, but they would really focus in on those clients with whom they had the best relationship, and to be frank, the wealthiest clients. What I think is going to happen over time as we go through a generational shift, and individuals are looking for information not just from my financial advisor, but my friends, other experts, right, other influencers, right, other Herb Greenberg, right? As they look at that, what I think is going to happen is that the technology will begin to envelop the financial advisor more, such that they will, over time, be able to serve more and more clients in different ways, which I think the industry should embrace, because it'll be different ways to touch that client.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you look at the way that the internet has evolved as a tool for financial services, the first 10 or 15 years of the internet, before LinkedIn, before Twitter, it was the anonymous web. And what really drove the greatest number of productivity gains was e-commerce, was driving websites to replace human capital. This was, the rise of E-Trade, the rise of Geico, Progressive, Amazon.com. Nowhere perhaps was this more felt than in the travel industry. Think about how we used to book a flight or we used to book a hotel. You had to go to a human being. That entire industry was disrupted by Internet 1.0. What I think is so exciting about social media and LinkedIn and personal marketing is that this decade of technology is not about replacing human beings, it's about enhancing them. It's about putting tools in the hands of advisors, in the hands of bankers, and really making them far more efficient and effective in their outreach.
So how do you answer the question of, aren't you just building up the personalities and the personas of the people in your company so that they are, when they can either ask for more money or they can leave and they take their reputations with them? It's a question that affects this and journalists.
No, Dan. In the business I came from, people interact with people. Right? People don't interact with the behemoth behind them. Indeed, the research shows that even after the terrible downturn we've seen, individuals have, at some of these firms with which I used to be associated, individuals have as much trust and as much regard for their advisor as they did before the downturn. They tend to be more skeptical of the institution that backs them. So if you believe that an individual, in wealth management buys from the big behemoth and that person just happens to be a cog in the wheel, then that works. But that's not how it works today. Mm-hmm. It's person to person. That's why when an advisor leaves today, their clients tend to, on average, follow them.
So that's happening anyway. And then you contrast that person-to-person trust to the latest stats that show, at least in America, the institutions that are least trusted are Congress, HMOs, and then banks. And so what does that mean? It means that if you're a financial institution, the best way to regain that trust and rebuild that brand equity is through your people and through the relationships that each one of them has.
And to personalize it.
That's right.
Right? Because no one feels sorry for a big institution or empathizes with a big institution or likes these days, many of them, but that person, it's a little bit like your congressional representative, right? Don't like Congress, like my guy.
Right. Or what do you think?
I'm thinking about how difficult it is or will be or has been for an advisor to, first of all, deal with social media. I still can't get beyond that because I can't see an advisor really, truly being great on social media given the way compliance is. I just think they're hamstrung. And by the way, being great on social media can be just linking people to great stories. I mean, how much...
But that's where the institution can help.
Right.
But the institution, if it's going to block it, because it's not going to have faith, if it's not going to have faith, if it's going to be afraid, the fear factor.
But we see institutions becoming less and less afraid. I remember we spoke on this topic, we've been speaking on this topic for years, and even a year, 18 months ago, compliance was still the #1 topic. Now I think people have acknowledged that you can address compliance through a combination of training, tools, and technology. And the question now is, how do we go beyond compliance to really empower each of our people to have a unique and authentic voice while staying within the brand or regulatory guidelines? And people are doing that. There are companies doing this, whether it's Axe Advisors or it's,
But the companies can provide them with, be very helpful to their advisors and their reps. Here are the 12 interesting articles today, right, that we have now curated for you, give to you, away you go. And, I would argue, by having the record of it, you've got the trail. I always preferred to have a trail than later on, 6 months later, well, I think he said this, no, I said that, and who can remember? When you've got the trail, you can say, nope, this is actually what was communicated.
Talk to me about the feedback loop also, because it's not just a question of saying here are 12 links. What you want is engagement. You want people to come back and say, that was a good one, this was a bad one, I disagree with it. What do you think? Hey, you're such an expert. Tell me what I should think about the LIBOR scandal, whatever it is. So you're going to be pulled into these discussions. How do you three, or either deal with comments, or when do you choose to engage, when don't you engage, and what would you recommend for other people too? Claire?
I think from a personal level, it's important to see what's being said, and sometimes there they don't really make sense, and sometimes it's really sparks a great conversation. But when we train advisors, we tell them you have to be responsive, and the reason why my company is called Hearsay is we believe social media is first and foremost about hearing what's being said, and then saying your message in the context of what matters to your client. And that's the most successful advisors out there, the most successful brands, the most successful corporate level pages and blogs, they all do that.
And when you write for Influencer, are you actually getting back into the comments and talking to people?
I do. I mean, I scan through them, and again,
Yeah.
a lot of them, they're just comments and there's not necessarily a conversation.
Right.
But to Herb's point, sometimes it really is the beginning of a much longer exchange.
Great.
Yeah, I think and I want to mention one thing about advisors and brokers. I'm surprised sometimes how many brokers actually tweet stupid things to me, and you can find it, and it's on whether it's on Twitter or it's a comment you can mention on LinkedIn. I'm a strong believer in engagement, and I think right now LinkedIn has an issue on engagement, because in the comments section it doesn't pay for me to go back and engage, because I can't engage directly with that person. So I want to be able to click on that person's name. They'll know that I've responded. They'll get back to me. Now we've created a feed and we've created a discussion.
So
I can't do that right
everyone.
now.
Don't worry. We've talked about this quite a bit.
That's critical.
Yeah.
So whether I'm on Twitter, I'm in LinkedIn, or wherever, I want to be able to go and engage. I've been an engager on social media back when it was not message boards, because I was not a fan of message boards, but I've genuinely just want to respond to my readers.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. And people, they want the interaction. And as Sallie and I were talking earlier about nasty comments, and I find even the nasty comments, if there's a point where there's a line, but sometimes you get back to people who have very nasty comments and they thought that you weren't even going to read them. And once you respond, there's a level of respect.
Yeah.
And you sort of bring them into the fold.
They feel
That's
heard.
all part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They just don't want to
Go
scream.
to therapy. Honest to goodness.
I will have to say, not that you're so controversial, or maybe you are, but when we analyze the comments and the exchanges that happen at the advisor level, there are far fewer nasty comments, if any. Because again, it goes back to that point, easy to hate a big institution or a big brand, hard to hate someone that you actually work with.
Very easy to hate a journalist.
Well, one of the features of LinkedIn that is useful for that is they're non-anonymous.
Right.
And so, I have gone in a few times and you have a nasty comment and I email them or whatever you call it, and I say, I can see you. I know who you are.
Right.
And you'd be surprised, oh my God, I forgot, I'm so sorry, it's so terrible. But it does, the level of discourse is a different level of discourse than through an anonymous medium.
Yep. Great. Well, let's take some questions from the crowd. We've got people with microphones walking around. Any questions right here in the middle in the teal shirt?
Hi. So in the discussion you've just had about trying to regain that trust for institutions by going through their advisors, having them be the face on social media, how do you strike a balance, though? Because I think a lot of institutions, they want to regain the trust with the actual bank rather than just for the very reasons you were saying, that a lot of people tend to follow the advisors when they go. So how does the bank leverage that, yet at the same time transfer that trust through the advisor to the institution?
Well, go ahead.
The content piece is key. So whether you've got content that exists on your website or your blog, or you've got executives writing on third-party channels, or if you work at PIMCO, for example, you've got your CEO writing on the LinkedIn Influencers blog, that is perfect corporate branded content that your advisors distribute on your behalf. Now, maybe they add their own personal take to it, they put a personal message attached to it, but when they share that out, that is incredibly powerful because they're curating these ideas back to their client, and that's good for them and it's good for the institution.
Yeah, I was going to say, and you were a step ahead of me, I was going to say put your CEO on. Have your CEO communicating it out there
but
now.
Is the CEO going to be writing it, and is it going to
But
be?
that's where I'm going. Hold on, Herb, a second. But that's true. I mean, and so the double-edged sword is if it's going to be the the corporate speak in it, then don't bother. in my opinion, right? If there is going to be, and by the way, what's always interesting for me to see is I go out and meet these CEOs, is they are dynamic, engaging. I mean, there's a reason they're CEOs. They're really interesting. They're really smart. They've got really great insights. And then by the time we get into corporate speak, it's all flattened out to one thing.
There was a Martha Stewart post that I just read the other day. I don't know if it's an old post or a new post about how you're never too old to recreate yourself and how she went through this thing. And I don't believe that was written by, if that was written by a PR department, great work. It sounded like it was written by her, because it was just, you could tell there was some catharsis being dealt with there.
I'll tell you what we see happen is that sometimes CEOs will do exactly that. They'll write a post and it will be so flat and so full of corporate speak, and it will do terribly.
Yeah.
And they'll get 100, 200 comments, and then the PR people start calling. What happened? Well, I don't understand. Why did my CEO get nothing? I can't show these numbers to him. At which point you say, this isn't very good. And if you want it to be good, you have to write in an authentic way. And CEOs recognize those numbers, so it seems to take a little while, but then it starts getting better and better.
Yeah, and even in organizations where you're not lucky enough to have a CEO like Martha Stewart or Richard Branson at the helm, who is really naturally taking to social media, there are other influencers in the company.
Yeah.
At banks, we work with a number of research analysts whose work has a very big following in a traditional sense, but they're recognizing that actually they can have greater influence by sharing that same work and reformatting the 20 megabyte PDF file into these smaller, snackable chunks that people can share. And social media is such a great way for them to do that.
Other questions?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about content and about social networks. And Clara, I've heard you speak a few times before, and you have a great way of defining the difference between social content and social networks. So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. So people often ask, what should LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter be concerned that there's Vine and Instagram and Pinterest? And I really don't see them as being in the same category. I view social networks as being very focused on people and relationships. And by and large, the social networks have been saturated. This is why I think Google Plus has been struggling to get people to sign up. People have already connected to their friends. They don't want to do it again. LinkedIn is their professional graph. Facebook is their friend graph. Twitter is their one-way followership graph. On the other side, though, if you look at Pinterest and YouTube and Instagram, these are not social networking sites per se, because they don't own their own graph. They're social media sites where it's not really about the people, but more about the content. Now, it turns out whether you're sharing Pinterest content, which are pin boards, or Instagram content, which would be photos, or it's YouTube content, which would be videos, turns out that social networking sites are ideal ways to distribute that content, but they're different things. And I think that's the brilliance of the influencers program, because you're bringing a new content format to the graph itself, and so it makes the distribution that much more seamless, because you have both.
Great. What else? Any other questions?
Hi, thanks, guys. If social media is an additional channel, we've talked about that. You've just mentioned the distinction between social networks versus social content creation, etc. When you're thinking about reps, some of this will inherently change the paradigm of how they do business. So how do you think about that? I mean, if you have somebody who you're asking somebody who is great one-on-one with a client, engaging and able to have that relationship, and then suddenly you're asking them to have an incredibly public presence on a platform, what do you think about that in terms of where we'll all be in 5 years?
That's a great question. Is this for everybody? Yeah.
Reps need to evolve. Reps need to sell and communicate the way that buyers want to be sold to and communicated with. And that has just been, the last decade has been transformational, starting with the internet. I mean, today's buyer is much savvier, much more educated, self-educated than before. Before they pick an advisor, before they pick what restaurant to go to, before they pick what to read, they go online. They do their research before they buy a car, before they buy insurance, almost anything. In fact, the Corporate Executive Board found last year that 57% of many offline purchases actually are completed online before the prospect even engages or allows themselves to be engaged with. And so I think reps need to adapt. The old way of selling, where it was brute force, dialing for dollars, going in cold, that doesn't work anymore. I mean, how many of us have bought something in recent memory from someone who cold called us or sent us an email? It just doesn't work. And so today's rep needs to be a trusted advisor. They can't just be transactional, because if they're just buying and selling stocks, well, people can just go and do that online and self-service. I think it's really, really a challenge for a lot of reps, but just like they had to get on mobile devices and learn email a decade ago, the same is true now of being personally branded on social media.
And as you know, you can talk directly to reps. I would talk in general about anybody, because I think it applies, and here's what applies, is not everybody's good at it. Not everybody's good at interaction, but the most important thing, whether it's blogs or however you're going to define social, don't let it go stale, because that to me shows it's gathering dust. And when I go to a business website, or I go to, there's a lot of small businesses, they try the blogs, you go in there, and you see they haven't posted in a year. And to me, that's just, then yank that down.
Worse, yeah.
Yeah, so you got to keep going, you got to keep it fresh. It's not easy to keep it fresh. There are various ways, and that's where it's probably going to separate the next level of salespeople, because there are going to be those who just get it. They know how to do it.
And this is a role, by the way, that all of you can play. Your reps need you to do this as marketers. I mean, we work with a number of companies that seed the content library with compliance pre-approved ideas and templates, and the reps can make it their own, because it is a lot to ask, even for your savviest rep, because they're busy, to come up with content from scratch. But all of us have great content that just needs to be reformatted for this LinkedIn era.
Well, the other thing I would add is to share another secret, which is probably not such a secret, is that what we saw at the wirehouses at which I've worked is that the most successful advisors were parts of teams, and that each advisor on the team did better in general than a sole practitioner did. And the sort of reasoning behind it is that they divide and conquer. And so to Clara's point, not everybody's going to be the social media guru, but not everybody has to be in charge of social media for the group, right? So you're the handshaker, you're the asset allocation guy, you're the fixed income expert, I'm social media and something else. So you can have it as sort of a team thing under someone's name or under the team name. The second thing I would say is a challenge here for the wealth management business overall, or any of these rep types of businesses, can be that there'll be individuals who will simply choose to opt out, right? And that's been a challenge for forever. I mean, we've still got people in the most dull and mundane of mutual funds who haven't rethought their investing philosophy. And that's just part of one of the issues with one of the challenges in the industry, that you as a sort of home office can decide we're going in this direction. And at least in the places where I've worked, what will often happen is the advisors will just watch you for a while and just say, this is the flavor of the hour, could well go away. I'm going to see what happens with this. But there will be folks who will opt out. It'll be that maybe the next generation, maybe the newer ones, maybe the more forward-thinking ones who will embrace this and find that it is a key to success, and the others will be more challenged over time.
Yeah, and by the way, this happened with email and with mobile devices.
Of course.
There were so many advisors who resisted this a decade ago, and some of them still had great enough books to sustain, but most of them, ultimately the competitiveness sorts itself out, and those who understand the pervasiveness and the power of these new technologies, and the sooner that they get on, you've got this diminishing return as everybody else in the industry figures out that they need to have a mobile device and that they need to be on LinkedIn.
Other questions? While you're taking it, I do have one question for Herb, though, about this. So as it seems like this would really enable financial journalists to give them an entire new well to start digging into to find information about different companies. So it does seem like the flip side, unlike with mobile phones where it was a one-to-one or you can reach people in different ways, you are putting yourself out there. I'm just curious, have you started using some of these methods for your own reporting?
No,
sources?
not individual social media. I don't see that from organizations. My gut feel is that it would be, after the lawyers and the compliance are done with it, it would be too homogenized and it wouldn't really be what I want. Again, it gets back to the individual if somebody's really good at it, if they're giving me a link to something I can believe, and I think that's the hardest thing. You see something and you just want to think it's homogenized and it's not real. And so when you compare that to what I'm seeing real time in my feeds in social media, that's your challenge. I think that's the challenge for this group, is to really make it genuine and authentic. I can't stress that enough.
Yep.
Make me want to use it. Make me want to turn to it the way we might turn to something a Bill Gross will put on his website, because he's going out there and he's really saying something that other people might not say. And I think Sallie would probably, if you were within an organization right now, you'd be the same way. You know.
That's great. Well, thank you all for joining us here today. It was really terrific, and for writing for LinkedIn. Follow all three if you're not already.